Hello and welcome to the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance presentation on best practice lighting principles. My name's Landon. I'm a board member of ADSA and also chair of the technical committee. The reason we developed the best practice lighting principles was simply the sheer number of questions we had about what is good dark sky sensitive lighting. And we thought it was important that we had a considered response to such an important question. We essentially spoke to the scientific community, the astronomical community, as well as the lighting community, because we really did want a holistic view about not just what was good for the astronomers, the scientists, wildlife, but also what was achievable as well. What I want to do now is just elaborate on each one of the 6 points in the dark sky principles. And the first one is to start with natural darkness, and this is a pretty obvious one. The first question we should ask in any lighting installation is, do we actually need to light it in the first place? It's amazing how much light we have from what the skies provide us, and it is without a doubt the most dark sky sensitive lighting you can do is not to put a light in the first place. The second is to use adaptive lighting controls, and it feeds into the first one in many ways. Because if there's one thing that's true about outdoor lighting is we only have it for humans. And if there are no people, then really we don't need this light. And unfortunately, we see scenes like this all over Australia and New Zealand with lighting illuminating areas that are uninhabited. With the use of adaptive lighting controls, we really don't have to have this issue. The advent of LED technology makes it an extremely easy to control light source. Things like motion sensors, timers, the ability to be able to dim, and actually having lighting that responds to the occupancy of space can really help reduce the problem of light pollution. Use the lowest intensity lighting appropriate to the task. Well, this is a very difficult one to talk about because the reality is each and every situation will be different. So what we thought we'd do is share with you this optical illusion. I think everyone can pretty clearly see that the square on the right is brighter than the square on the left. But of course we know that isn't the case. And what this highlights is just how important background luminance is, how much the ambient brightness of the space dictates how much lighting we actually need. The darker the space, the less light we need. But adversely, the brighter the space, the more light we need. And this is the problem that we have with light pollution. As the problem grows and the world gets brighter and brighter, then we actually need more and more light. So it's a self-perpetuating issue. Light only the object or area intended. Well, here's a classic example of a light not doing that. This is a street light. Its purpose is to light the street and the pathway. And it's putting just as much light onto the houses and the tree. And unfortunately, if you resided in one of these houses and your bedroom was at the front of the house, then you would basically need full block-out curtains to get a good night's sleep. You can also assume that pretty much any wildlife that was residing in that tree has now long since moved on. It's a graphic example of what light pollution is, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is an example from Launceston in Tasmania, a relighting of a pathway. This is the existing lighting, and it was a very wide distribution, so we say, throwing light everywhere. And as a result, about 40% of what was being produced was actually ending up in the Tamar River. The Tamar has quite a high bird wildlife population. There's obviously aquatic life in there as well. So this is quite harmful to that environment. What the designer was able to do is get away from this throw light everywhere approach and actually use a fitting that pushes light up and down the pathway. And in doing so, actually controlling light and, as we say, lighting the intended object. The end result was about a 75% reduction in the amount of light spill into the Tamar River. At the same time, it also saved the council 75% on their energy bill and actually improved the lighting outcomes for the people that use the space. It shows that we can actually direct light to where we need to be. We just need to think about it and execute it. The other interesting one that we often see when we're talking about lighting the object is that people are ground dwellers. And if light is for people, that makes sense that light should be directed towards the ground where we inhabit. But here's a classic example where you can see lots of light going upwards and into the eve, and that's, again, just direct image of light pollution. The other thing that this light's doing really badly is a lot of the light is going directly into my eyes. It's not shielded, and that is essentially glare. And whenever we have glare, we have safety issues because it really stops us from being able to see the world properly. The eye can handle extremely bright amount of light. Think about a sunlight day and out and about. It can also handle extremely low levels of light, walking around under moonlight. The one thing the eye can't do is handle both at the same time. And so when we have unshielded lights and light being poorly directed and directed into people's eyes, it doesn't enable us to see the person standing in the gateway properly. In over half the cases that I'm asked to go and look at where people complain that they don't have enough light, they have more than enough light. Usually what they have is too much glare. Sadly, when we go to these situations, people realise that they can't see the person in the gate. The solution isn't to let's remove the glare. It's often to let's put up more lights. And again, the problem perpetuates. Use reduced short wavelength light sources. Well, lights are made up of visible spectrums of light, and the short wavelengths are the ones at the left of the screen. They're the blues, the violets, and the ultraviolets. And the reason we really encourage people to get away from these light sources is that, well, as you can see by this graphical demonstration, they tend to have more of an impact on wildlife than the red end of the spectrum, the longer wavelengths. They also have a far greater impact on our circadian systems as humans during the nighttime hours. And they also cause a lot more issues with sky glow. It's the short wavelengths that scatter more in the atmosphere, blocking our view of the stars. So when it comes to picking light sources, we have a choice of what color temperature and what spectral makeup that we want to use. And in essence, it's a good rule of thumb. The warmer the color temperature, the less blue you're going to have in this spectrum. And we can see this demonstrated here. From 6,500 Kelvin down to 3,000 Kelvin, 2.7, the blue slowly reduces as we warm up our color temperature. And then we can move into ambers and PC amber lights. And you can see there they have basically no blue. And so the question would be, well, shouldn't we just use those all the time? And it's a difficult one to answer, but I'll give you another example. This is a town in England where they had an issue with the lights causing disruption to the bat population. And they found that the bats were actually very good with a red spectrum. And so what they did is they changed the street lights in this area to basically emit that red spectrum, and so the bats could go about breeding and go about their daily lives. Now, to me, that's perfectly adequate lighting for a roadway because I can navigate the corner safely. I can see exactly what's going on. I'm not going to run off the road. But let's think about this if it was a public space and we wanted to actually encourage people to hang out here. And if you look at the trees, the colour is very monochromatic. It actually feels a fairly bit dingy and a little bit, shall we say, sort of dark, and it's not overly inviting. And so whilst this is a great solution for wildlife, for dark sky in general, it's not such a good solution for heavily populated human environments. And so this is another example in Sydney of a 2,700 Kelvin light source. So a little bit of blue now present. So it's not the gold standard in terms of dark sky, but it does also at the same time greatly improve the colour rendering of the environment. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's reason when we set up ADSA approved lighting that we knew that we couldn't just have one type of light. We had to have multiple levels of categories to deal with the multiple situations. But it comes back to this question that we start with: should we have light in the first place? And if we do, then it's there for human use. So what is that human use? And so there will be situations where the environment absolutely takes precedence, and we look at the ambers and the reds solution that you're seeing on the right. But there will be other times where we have to understand that the only reason the light's there is for human use, and we have to encourage it. So then all we can do is the best practice. What is the best practice? And in that case, reduce the blue as much as possible, direct light down, keep it out of the trees, which this light's doing very well, shield it so there's no glare, again, doing a good job of that. And we'll assume that they've put in adaptive lighting control as well. The final one is to use a suitably qualified lighting professional. And no, that does not mean you're an electrician. They're there for electrical safety. They don't know anything about lighting. There are industry bodies such as the International Association of Lighting Designers, the Illuminating Engineer Society. But essentially, if you are looking at upgrading your lighting or putting in a new lighting installation, it's really important you do seek out some professional advice, and it's really important that that person is fully aware of what are the best practice lighting principles. Thank you.